Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our second webinar on the i4Driving project. This project is integrated for the driver modeling under uncertainty. And some of you, I know that you have already joined our previous webinar, so you know that we have this last final event series of 8 webinars, and today is number 2. So just a little bit about the project itself. We started in 2022. It's a project funded by the European Commission, and we have the partners that you can see on the right side, from authorities to many research institutes on human factors or traffic engineering or different aspects. And we also have tier 1 partners. We had this very ambitious vision and objective. So our vision is to lay the foundation for a new industry standard methodology to establish a credible and realistic human road safety baseline for virtual assessment of CCAM systems. And our main objective was to develop this library of i4Driving models, and these models were tested, were validated and calibrated with data that we collected from simulators and test tracks, and that's mainly the topic that we will focus today. And then that was used for to test applications in the evaluation framework. And this figure is the workflow of the project, which basically shows what I was mentioning, that we have developed these models as the central piece. And we started by gathering evidence from human factors from data that was already there, data sets. And then we had these two streams on with simulations and with test track experiments. And we use that also for validate, calibrate the models, and later on testing in the applications, which is the phase that we are at the moment. And for today, as you can see, we had already the first webinar. You have the QR code that you can use to register for the following upcoming webinars. The last one will be on the 31st of March. There is a correction about that. And today we will focus, without further ado, I will pass already and start. So today we are going to focus on experimental data collection using the driving simulators and the test tracks. And we have our dear colleagues from the project, Johan Olstam and Ms. Tanja Niels from TU Munich, and Johan is from VTI. So I will pass immediately to them. We will have a shared presentation as in the previous one between the two of them, and in the end there's the possibility to have some minutes for some questions. You can put the questions in the chat, and then we can invite our speakers to come up with all the right answers. So Tanja, Johan, up to you.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Maria, and welcome also from my side. We are very happy to present our experimental data collection today. So as was already mentioned by Maria, the objective is to deliver a library of credible models of heterogeneous human driver behaviors, which then can ultimately be used to establish a credible human safety baseline for the virtual assessment of CCAM systems. So all in all, we need to understand and model heterogeneous human driving behavior, and we also need to model the performance of a competent and careful driver, which could then serve as a human road safety baseline. Now, this can, of course, not be done without the data. So we had several efforts in driving simulators and test track experiments to collect data for model development, for calibration and validation. Now, of course, if we want to collect data, there are different possibilities to analyze human driving behavior. Now, the first one would be to observe real traffic or to do a naturalistic driving study where drivers are observed in real traffic. However, such studies, of course, have some drawbacks as well. So in principle, we cannot observe specific situations that we are interested in, but we have to observe the situations that appear in reality. We have no flexibility and reproducibility to repeat certain scenarios, and safety critical situations luckily don't happen that often in real traffic. Now, to overcome these drawbacks, it's well established to conduct simulator studies, where we can flexibly create the scenarios that we want to analyze, and also look at safety critical situations because we are in a safe environment with the driving simulator. The studies are also reproducible, but of course we are not in a real vehicle on the real road, so the validity is not as high as in naturalistic driving studies. Also in this project, we used a special approach in some of the scenarios where, in order to cover most of the modeled behavioral mechanisms and gather a lot of information in different situations, the motorway driving simulator experiments replicated more of a naturalistic driving study, which of course then reduced a bit the reproducibility. But all in all, we have these two worlds. And in order to bridge the gap between the simulator world and the real world, we also conducted test track experiments. Here, we also have a high flexibility and reproducibility. But of course, we also have some real world limitations like the size of the test track or weather conditions that can change, etc. So on the other hand, the validity of the test track experiments is assumed to be higher than the simulator experiments because here we are really in a real vehicle and on a real road surface. So all in all, the different data collection methods have their strengths and weaknesses, and we combined two of the methods to get the best out of the two worlds. We decided to look into different ODDs, into different areas in this project. So we considered urban intersections, urban highways or arterials, and also motorways. Now we have, of course, many possibilities to test different scenarios, repeat them, look at safety critical scenarios, etc. But of course, the time budget in such a project is limited. And therefore, we have to carefully evaluate which scenarios to test. And in order to decide for the most meaningful scenarios, we had a two-stage Delphi study and an iterative process to come up with the most meaningful hypotheses that are, for example, related to workload, effort, and attention. And you can also find the whole description of the process and the hypotheses in the deliverable 1.5, which is linked here, and you can also find it on the website. Yeah, the agenda for today is as follows. I will hand over to my colleague Johan Olstam for the driving simulator experiments, and then I will get back with the test track experiments afterwards, and Johan will then wrap up the whole seminar in the end. So, Johan,
Yes.
please continue with the driving simulator experiment.
Yes, thanks, Tanja. So my name is Johan Olstam, and we are going in to describe this driving simulator experiments conducted. Those of you that listened to the webinar last Friday might recall that Hans and Klaus was talking about this, or Hans especially mentioned this fundamental diagram of task demand and the need to verify and calibrate those, which is a part of the model. I will not go in detail, but you need data on the efforts or the task load and relate that to different driving relations. So this was one of the aims, and another aim was to collect data for the calibration. So some of these things we present today was input to some of the results presented last week, and some of things are input to some of the results presented in later webinars. So we had 4 different sites, one at VTI, one at TUM in Germany, and VTI in Sweden, and then CTAG in Spain and UNINA in Italy. Looking into different heterogeneity and driving behavior in different traffic conditions, lighting conditions, and so on. I will come back. We tried to do, even if it's 4 different sites, to do a common design of experiments. We looked into different population dimensions like age, gender, driving experience, safety level, and if they regular bike or not. of course, 4 different cultural backgrounds and so on. And in total, there were 162 drivers and over 80 hours of driving recorded. So the idea was to try to at least treat this as one huge experiment with 4 different sites. It's challenging because each simulator is different, of course, but we had the ordinary training, but we also tried to do a familiarization phase at all sites in order to find out how familiarize the drivers to the simulators. But we also had a common car following task that was done at each site in order to collect data on which headways drivers use and how that could maybe align from the simulators. In order to be able to study as much as possible but still allow for variations in a structured way, we divided the main part into 2. So we did urban scenarios at VTI and TUM and motorway driving scenarios at UNINA and CTAG. And in the end, in all of the cases, we had a harsh braking or a critical scenario with harsh braking of a leader vehicle, which is related to one of these regulation cases that Tanja previously mentioned. And that was then done by all participants at all sites. And we collected data on the participant vehicle and surrounding vehicle, of course, but what was really important here was to collect workload proxy metrics using eye tracking data or physiological measurements. So we collected gaze directions, pupil diameter, and eyelid, and heart rate, and the UNINA also tried brain activity helmet collection. And those different workload proxies was then combined to a continuous metric trying to measure the workload or the effort during the drive. And in order to also vary the effort, we added in several of the cases a non-driving related task. And of course, we collected data on when that was active or how they responded. And then information about the participants, standard age, gender, but also driving style according to driving skill inventory. And in some of the cases also whether they regular bike or not. So for the urban driving simulators that were done at VTI and TUM, and when going through intersections, you need, and you also have active modes like pedestrians and bikes going, you need to look over the shoulder before turning. So at VTI, we also extended the work we have done previously with using XR headsets, which allows you to have a more larger field of view in that sense. And the idea was that we tried to do this in a structured way. So we had one main intersection, which was similar at VTI and TUM, which was either turning right or left, and there might be bicyclists coming from behind or not. There might be traffic coming from left or right. And this one we then varied and in these chunks. And between those intersections, we had either straight driving and car following situations or passing a pedestrian crossing and so on, some different variations. So here are some pictures. So we had this main intersection where you could turn left or right. The bicycle might be there or not. There might be cross traffic or not, which gives 16. You drive through this 16 times. Plus we repeated 4 of these with also non-driving related task. So you pass that one 20 times. And in some of the cases, you also then pass this pedestrian crossing you see in the middle. There might be pedestrians there or not. There might be moving towards or not. And in between, we also added some other activities like car following with different number of lead vehicles or followers and so on. It's very difficult to show lots of results, but highlighting some at least from this the VTI driving simulator study. So this is then showing glance proportions to the NDRT screen, forward, left, right, to the mirrors or over the shoulder, and then we have the efforts at the bottom for when turning an intersection, when going straight, or when passing this pedestrian crossing. And glances to the non-driving related tasks seems to be highest when you go straight, while when you need to pass and interact with pedestrians or turning, you don't do that as much. When you're going straight, you mainly look forward, makes sense. When you need to turn, you look more to the left and right than when you go straight, also makes sense. Mirror glances are more when you get closer to the turning point, and the efforts is highest at the intersection when you do the turn, but it also increases during the approaching the intersection. We could then put that into a match baseline when the non-driving related task was not active. And sorry, I forgot to mention this non-driving related task is self-paced, so you could decide on how frequent you interact with this tablet. And obviously there is very few glances to the non-driving related task when it's not active, but sometimes. But it's also interesting to see that it seems like there are fewer forward glances. So instead of looking forward, you look to the tablet and the task. Glances to the left and right doesn't seem to be that much affected, so you don't sacrifice glances there in order to do this task. But there is apparently fewer mirror glances, which could be an issue. And the effort also increases when this non-driving related task is active. So if we look on those different hypotheses that we put up for the urban experiments, these are just part of it, but there were some that were extra interesting for the model development. The first one was, will increased task demand reduce situational awareness? And the results indicate that this will happen. But to a large extent, drivers use their spare capacity as well, or adapt their behavior by slowing down to be able to handle this increased task demand. Another thing was, if you have several conflicts and target areas that you need to scan in order to pass an intersection, for example, will that lead to insufficient scanning and longer perception time? And the results indicate that that's the case. So if you only have one target, for example, the pedestrian crossing, then that's easier than if you have to look both for traffic to the right and left and bicyclists from behind and so on. Do drivers check for bicyclists approaching from behind before turning right at the urban intersection? This is they don't. They're frequently missing that. In 20% of these turns that all these drivers did, they didn't look at all, and in 50% of cases they did look, but not at right time or not in a timely manner. Do drivers use speed adaptation to enable timely scanning of necessary target areas? It's a little bit difficult, but drivers that did check all the target areas that they need to check, they spent significantly longer time in each zone. It's of course it's not easy to judge whether they did this actively but the results indicate that you need to slow down in order to be able to do all the scannings that you need to do according to the rules. In addition, we can also mention this some critical scenarios. For example, this one studied at TUM, where you had 3 different cases where pedestrians were crossing the road, either when it was clear sight or partly obstructed, as in scenario B, or more full obstruction as passing behind a bus, in this case in scenario C. And in A, when they clearly see the pedestrians, they generally slow down, and there doesn't seem to be a big difference between different types of drivers. While in B, the young drivers and less experienced drivers scan more frequently and maybe get a little bit confused and maybe are less experienced on how to handle the situation. While in scenario C, it seems like the more experienced driver or older drivers thought that this could be a problem, so they were more cautious, while the younger drivers and less experienced drivers were more risk-taking. So This results for the urban experiment was used for several different things, but as mentioned previously, it was used in the development of this fundamental diagram of task demand for the handling conflicts in intersections. So this is the slide that Hans showed on the last webinar, where looking on how effort varies from the distance to the stop line and when turning and the different points and handling different conflicts. We had also this motorway driving simulator experiments done at CTAG and UNINA. And here there were different things varied. So here we varied daylight and night driving. So each driver came to 2 sessions, driving in daylight or night. Of course, it's this artificial night conditions then in the driving simulator. They also had a non-driving related task added. So in this case, it was to figure out if 2 rotated figures here were the same or not. And as Tanja mentioned, this was slightly different. If you look in the urban, we were having a structured variation around this specific intersection and trying to look on how the effort varies for different number of conflicting situations. While in the motorway case, we tried to do a more of a naturalistic driving in a driving simulator to capture all the different types of behavioral mechanisms needed to simulate motorway driving in car following, lane changing, merging on an on-ramp, handling merging traffic, handling social pressure from vehicles behind. So this was a continuous drive. And you can see here that the events were placed at different locations with some time in between. So for example, we had entering from an on-ramp, handling gap acceptance, both looking into the acceleration behavior on the on-ramp and the merging behavior. We had driving in uncongested traffic scenario where you need to overtake slower vehicles, and it could also be in situations where there is faster vehicles catching up with the participants and putting social pressure by tailgating at a short distance or using the horn to signal that they would like to pass. We also had driving on the motorway and vehicles cutting in front in order to reach off ramp or entering from the on ramp. They also tried also a kind of a new or innovative way driving a real world recorded traffic, taking some data from the NGSIM trajectories collected in the US and controlling the surrounding vehicle using real world recorded data. Same here, some of these findings for the hypothesis, there are more in the deliverables. The first one was related to social pressures from vehicles behind force leading drivers to change lane, and that's the data strongly supports that's happening. We had this specific question on if this task demand increase with shorter headways, and those of you that listened to last week's webinar from Hans showed this. We're trying to fit how the task demand and the headway to the vehicle in front is related. So here it seems that this is the case and it was possible to fit such a fundamental diagram of task demand. And do the task demand increase with speed? It's also indicated, at least in the merging scenarios, that drivers that drove faster experience higher effort. If it's that they drive faster due to higher effort, or if they are experiencing higher effort because driving fast, that's of course a two-way thing. The same as for the urban, if this increased task demand reduced situation awareness, this seems to be the case also in the motorway driving cases. And if drivers use speed adaptation to enable timely scanning, that seems to be the case as well, that they might adjust their speed in, for example, some of the merging situations to allow for more time to look in the left mirror. Yes, and I said at end of each driving simulator experiments, we try to collect data for this deceleration scenario in the ALKS regulation case. And this one is then that the leader is placed 2 seconds in front and then strongly decelerate. In the motorway, we did that in the motorway speed. In the urban, we did that in urban speeds. If it was due to the being in a driving simulator, or is it also that due to that this situation is something that you would like to avoid, and if you're in a driving simulator or experiment, you try to adapt your speed, but it was in several cases not possible to get the participants to follow at 2 seconds time gap, meaning difficult to force them into the situation, and many participants adapted the speed or had a longer time headway. So from this, we decided that in the test track experiments, we should try to do a cut-in situation instead, and maybe use professional drivers to replicate this careful and competent driver. So with that, I leave back to you, Tanja, to tell what happened in the test track experiments then, which was conducted in the slightly later than the driving simulator experiments.
Thank you, Johan. Yeah, then I continue with the test track experiments. Similarly to the simulator experiments, we also use different test tracks in our work package. Okay. Yeah, we looked at 3 different test tracks, which also had the advantage that they were different in size and therefore also allowed for different speeds and different scenarios to be tested. 2 of the test tracks were located in Spain with CTAG, and 1 at TUM here near Munich. So yeah, the objective for the test track experiments was to, on the one hand, collect data in near to real world scenarios for the model development. The major difference, of course, to the driving simulator is here that participants sit in a real car and drive on a real road surface, but we can only replicate very predefined scenarios because all the surrounding road users have to be artificially put there as well. So a more naturalistic driving study, as was done in the motorway experiment in the driving simulator, is not that easily possible. The second objective was to collect data for the model validation in critical scenarios. And of course, this poses a major challenge because replicating critical scenarios on the test track is difficult and also potentially dangerous for the participants. Therefore, we performed the tests with 2 different methods. One was with the so-called UFO vehicle, an ultra-flat overrunable target, which can be seen in the photo on the top. And the other test was performed with augmented reality, so that the conflicting road users were not real persons or cars, but they were only virtual. But before starting with these validation experiments, let's first start with the first set of experiments that looked at non-critical scenarios. So at first, we collected data for the model development in the on urban highways at CTAG premises near Vigo. And the 2 hypotheses that were tested there were first, does task demand increase with speed? And does social pressure from vehicles behind force drivers to increase their speed? So the experiment was run in several rounds where the drivers had different maximum allowed speeds and different situations where they were in free driving or following another vehicle. And they had a non-driving related task where they should read out a text that was printed and put next to the steering wheel. The main result was that when the people had this non-driving related task and should read the text, then they automatically reduced their speed to compensate for the higher task demand. When we look at the second experiment and the second hypothesis, There were again several rounds. The vehicle was either driving alone or being followed by another vehicle at a short distance. And to further increase the pressure, the vehicle from the back could also apply the horn or lights to stress the people more. And we also had a scenario where the ego vehicle also had a vehicle in front. Now this experiment was conducted both in daytime and in night conditions. It was seen that in night conditions, the social pressure is higher. If there is social pressure from a vehicle behind, then drivers tend to increment the speed relative to free driving, where they are just freely choosing their own speed without any influence from other vehicles. For the situation that there is a vehicle in front as well, then drivers would rather overtake during daylight conditions and not so much in nighttime conditions. And participants looked longer and more at the rear mirrors to check for the vehicle behind them when driving with social pressure. Yeah, we didn't only conduct the test track experiments at this urban highway scenario, but we also looked at the motorway scenarios. This is, of course, not possible on every test track, but CTAG has one test track which is located in Lyon, a high-speed test track that is more than 1 kilometer long. And here we were able to test two further regulation cases from the UN regulation, in addition to the one that has been tested in the driving simulator with the harsh deceleration. There is the cut-out scenario, where a vehicle is in front which cuts out, and then another vehicle further in front decelerates harshly. So we will see that on the next slide as well. And a cut-in scenario where another vehicle cuts in right in front of our ego vehicle and also forces the ego vehicle to decelerate. So the cut-out maneuver was also conducted for the model development. We can see here the two different scenarios with speeds of 60 and 80 kilometers, and the situation that the ego vehicle is following two vehicles in front, and suddenly the direct vehicle in front does a cut-out maneuver, and the vehicle SV2, which is in front or was in front of the other vehicle, then decelerates harshly. Now, it was observed in these experiments that the drivers handled the cut-out maneuver really well. They could always show stable behavior, so it was not really observed to be that critical. The higher speeds, of course, increased the workload, but the drivers were alert and were able to adjust their headways really fast and in a stable way. Therefore, it was decided that for the model validation, the cut-in maneuver would be even more interesting because it is more critical that a vehicle from another lane suddenly cuts into the ego vehicle's lane, which is unexpected from the driver's perspective. Since this is a more safety critical scenario, it was not conducted with real vehicles only, but the vehicle that performs the cut-in is the so-called UFO vehicle, which we can see here on this video. So it's a flat platform, and the vehicle itself is inflated. So if an accident happens, then the participant would run over this flat platform with his or her vehicle, and no injuries would happen or no severe crash. So let's see the video of the test track, and we can see here the test driver and the UFO vehicle that is starting to perform this cut-in maneuver, and the test driver reacts. And for this test, professional drivers were invited to drive. So we have fewer participants in this scenario, but they are professional drivers, so we can really expect them to react as fast and as professional as possible. Now for this test, different scenarios were analyzed with different speeds and different longitudinal distances that triggered the cut-in maneuver, and also different lateral speeds for the cut-in vehicle to perform the maneuver. The main results of the experiment were that the highest collision risk is shown when the longitudinal distance between the vehicles at the onset of the cut-in was short. So if they were already following very closely behind each other, the driver's reaction times were also influenced not only by the longitudinal, but also by the lateral speeds involved. So the drivers react as soon as they recognize a lane change. They do not wait until the vehicle fully changed the lanes, but whenever they see that the other vehicle is starting to change lanes, they react directly, and therefore a larger lateral speed was even better for the drivers because they could more easily spot this intent to change lanes. Now, this human anticipation reduces the number of unpreventable cut-in scenarios, so also no unpreventable crash happened in the test track. The reaction times decreased over the experiment if the drivers repeated the experiment several times. So we could also see the learning effect on drivers' response. I don't go more into detail here because we will have a separate webinar specifically on this very interesting experiment and the data analysis, which will take place on 13th of March. Now, the final set of test track experiments that we did looked into urban scenarios, and it was performed at the TUM test track, Mobility Innovation Campus, which is a much smaller test track and therefore allows for low speeds, but it has an urban intersection with protected bike lanes. And we looked specifically at situations where the ego vehicle encounters VRUs at the intersection, and where the ego vehicles encounters vehicles that disobey the rules at intersections, and at pedestrian jaywalking. So similar, the pedestrian jaywalking was similar to the driving simulator experiment as well. Now, in order to ensure a safe experiment, we used augmented reality in this scenario. So the driver is sitting in the vehicle wearing augmented reality glasses and seeing the actual test track outside the window and also the vehicle itself, and then other road users and also surrounding buildings and trees, for example, are shown in virtual reality, as can be seen here on the right, where you see the hands of the driver and then the windshield, and you see that the pedestrian is currently crossing the street, but the pedestrian is not there in real life. Now, this allows for analyzing critical scenarios, which we did. And here you can see one example in the video where the other vehicle, which is shown in blue, should stop, but it is not stopping, and therefore the ego driver has to decelerate harshly to avoid an accident. Now, these experiments were conducted recently, and we're currently analyzing the results we're also preparing a paper for the RSS 2026 Road Safety and Simulation Conference, and the deliverable will also be published soon. Now with this, I would hand over to Johan again for summarizing the research output and the whole webinar.
Yes, thanks, Tanja. So I mean, it is a lot of experiments, and here we try to describe the setup and so on. But of course, there's much more to it. So there is 4 deliverables, this 3.2 and 5.2 describing the ID and the setup, and this 3.4 and 5.3 describing the output. There will also be one 5.4 coming, if I remember right, Tanja, on those things that you mentioned that are still on analysis. There are also some papers already out there, and some is submitted and some is going to be submitted. So I think we will post those links in the chat so that you can get there. And if you like to know more, if you go to the next one, we have contact persons here also for each of the experiments. You can of course just contact me or Tanja, and we will guide you to the right person. But if you would like to know more on the urban driving simulator experiments, you can contact me, or for the TUM cases, of course, you can contact Tanja. For the UNINA motorway driving simulator experiments, we suggest you contact Vincenzo, the scientific coordinator, and we have Irene Sacco at CTAG, which were highly involved in both the motorway driving simulator experiments and the test tracks at CTAG. And as we said, the data and also the picture Maria showed in the beginning, the data is used in different ways. So we had already in the first webinar some of the results. Oh, sorry, here it was only the urban driving simulator. It's both the urban and the motorway driving simulator experiments, as you saw. And we will have in the 6th of March this calibration approaches and outcomes using the motorway driving simulator data to calibrate the i4Driving model for each driver. That's the work that UNINA have done and will present. Tanja already made commercial for the cut-in scenario regulation case using this test track data. And on the 27th of February, we will have even more driving simulator experiments where we will tell you a little bit on how we use driving simulators to try to evaluate how realistic these behavior driver models is perceived by real drivers. So doing a kind of Turing inspired test using driving simulators. And so there's 2 hashtags there, or sorry, QR codes there, and one is for the webinar registration. Another one is to get to the homepage and get to the deliverables. But I don't know if our colleagues may have already posted the links to the deliverables there. And with that, I guess, Tanja, we open for questions.
Exactly.
Thank you very much to both of you. It's always super interesting to learn a bit more and to see how the simulators and the experiments went. Pretty sure the participants would have liked it to assist, but that was just a privilege for the partners of the consortium. And now we do have a few minutes that we can receive some questions from your side. You can use the chat to put them there, or if you need, you can also raise your hands and I can just allow you to make the question as well.
I guess while waiting for the questions, I think we can add that it was not only doing this driving simulator experiments and test track experiments, as you saw in Tanja's picture here, with using this XR headset to do augmented reality in the test track and also in the driving simulator. So we also have pushed the development on this type of data collection methods as well, both for the driving simulator using XR headset and also test track experiments, and also pushing safety to the limit with this UFO vehicle case, which I remember CTAG was quite worried about. Oh, we have a question from Thomas, yes, about data availability. And this is one is a little bit of a tricky. We connected physiological measurements like heart rate, and that's sensitive personal data. So GDPR is an issue here. So it depends a little bit, and also to interpret that. So if you're interested in the data, I would recommend to contact each organization to discuss that in more detail, both to have an understanding and also to see what type of data you might be interested in and whether that's possible to share or not, given informed consent and GDPR conditions.
Maybe one positive answer, the test track experiment data for the model development are already available. If you go on the website and then open this deliverable, it will open both the data, which is of course pre-processed, but I think it offers still like possibility to do your own analyses, etc., and also the report of the results.
We have some questions in the chat, so I'm going to read. I was wondering how the agent's behaviors were calibrated in the driving simulator experiments across different labs, particularly for critical maneuvers. Were they modeled on the local human driving data?
Good question. There are several different things to address there. One thing is to say that in the urban experiments, they were more controlled to be coming at certain points to ensure this reproducibility. So, and they were not really a safety. It was either traffic coming from left or right, or the bike coming from behind, and the bike would stop or not. I mean, so that they were not calibrated in that sense. They were strictly controlled to ensure reproducibility. While in the motorway driving simulator experiments, it was using the software from Octal in both the CTAG and UNINA driving simulator experiments. Whether that's calibrated on Italian or Spanish drivers, I'm not sure. So that's maybe if someone from UNINA CTAG is here. But that at least used the same scenario programming, so it was the same behavior in both the Spanish and the Italian driving simulator experiments. Whether that's good or bad, depending on if the Spanish participants experienced the Italian surrounding behavior or vice versa. Yeah. I don't know if anyone from UNINA or CTAG knows about the calibration of the surrounding vehicles in the motorway driving simulator experiment, if that was calibrated to Spanish or Italian drivers.
Yep. Hi, Johan, Tanja, Maria. Thank you all, and thanks for to explain so well all the results and all the work for all the partners. Thank you so much. It was very interesting all the presentation. So from our side, I think I speak from CTAG and also Nina. We were using the same software version. In that case, was a scanner, and same logic and software for all the scenarios. In our case, at CTAG, the agent behaviors in the driving simulator were calibrated using a multi-level approach to try to ensure the realism and cross-lab consistency. That was especially for the critical maneuvers. For example, this forces lane changes, the emergency braking, merging, and lane merge, and the cutting, of course. That's were available in some cases using local naturalistic driving data that was implemented in different models from the scanner. And this data were used to key parameters such as reaction time, acceleration profiles, etc. However, the main objective was not to replicate these national driving styles or this naturalistic driving style, but was to ensure the experimental comparability across the different sites. That means UNINA and CTAG. So therefore, we implemented a common parameterization framework with we try to control the different levels and predefine these critical targets. So that is, for example, the time to collision the threshold, for example. So some the scenarios were like iterations validated, iteration try and iteration validated to guarantee the consistency in the severity and reproducibility for across the different simulators. So I'm not sure if I explain everything well or not, or if maybe Marcelo has something to add.
Many thanks, Irene. I also see a question on the physiological data, knowing they are noisy and sensitive to movement. Yes, they are really an issue, but we also have some experts here, my colleague Johan Olstam, that have been working a lot with physiological data. So there were, I don't know if Christer could help me out here saying a little bit, but you need, of course, not to look on one single measurement. You need to look on the time series, and that's why we also try to combine those different effort metrics. Yes, Christer.
I'm allowed to speak. Great. So for the ECG, it's not a big problem. We use a medical grade bioamplifier. We have very sticky electrodes and so on, and lots of tape. So for the ECG, it's fine. The eye tracker built into the XR headset is also working very nicely most of the time. The EEG, I'm not sure. It was not part of the VTI experiments, so I cannot really answer about that.
Yeah, no. If anyone from UNINA have anything to add on that, but one need to take care of it for sure. And it was also kind of, as I recall, heart rate was one quite good metric, but they were also combining these metrics in order to get the workload or effort metric was quite important.
We have one more. So
yes, simulator sickness. Yeah, this always this issue. And I think it was not a big issue in the motorway driving, as I recall. There, of course, always some doing lots of turns in tight areas in an urban environment is problematic. Also, this with using VR or XR headsets. So in the VTI driving simulator experiment, at least we had somewhat more dropouts due to this lots of turning and then also implying looking around, looking over the shoulder and so on. But in the end, we had like 40-ish participants, but I think we were, if I recall, it was maybe 60. So we had like quite a big problem there with the turning. I don't know if that was the same, Tanja, for the test track with the XR thing with all this turning, or if that was better.
Yeah, we also had some issues with sickness, even in the test track experiment, because participants were wearing the headset, which is quite heavy. And of course, adjusting to this augmented reality setup is also can be tricky for the brain. But still, you have the advantage of having a physical movement of the vehicle as well. So you do not only see the movement, but you actually feel it. So that helps.
And we also, of course, have in the questionnaire of how they have experience or not simulate the sickness, so that we can take that into account in the analysis, whether to include or not if the difference. Yes, and the screening criteria, that was also good. Yes, so I don't know if you used that in TUM, but at least at VTI we also said that we asked the participants in the questionnaire for recruitment whether they have experience of using VR headsets or gaming experience and so on.
Any other question from the participants? If not, I'm pretty sure that Johan and Tanja will not be bothered to answer some other questions that you might have via email, and you can always contact also via the website the colleagues from the project. Unless Tanja or Johan, if you have any question for each other, last moment.
No. So don't hesitate, as you said, Maria, to contact us if you have any further questions.
So thank you very much. Thank you very much to our speakers. Thank you very much to the participants. And looking forward to see you also in our third webinar next Friday. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.